Hello, I'm Rachel Moss, and this story is called Breadcrumbs. Once upon a time, in a land far away, but not so very far from you that you couldn't find it on a map, there lived a family, a girl, a boy, and their father. They had a stepmother too, but they didn't like to include her in their calculation of family. The family lived in a deep, dark wood far from city or town. They'd been there for a long time, ever since the children's mother died. The first year the children remembered was peaceful. Their father had a stock of food in the larder of the cabin, and he let them play all day. At the end of the first year, the supply of food dwindled, and their father left them for a day and a night. After that, he returned from the city, not with supplies, but with Claire, who brought with her 2 chickens and a whole stock of seeds. She is not your mother, their father told them, but she'll do. The children weren't very happy to share their father with a stranger, but he seemed happier, and Claire taught them how to care for the chickens and how to sow the seeds, harvesting first quick-growing lettuces and later potatoes and garlic and cabbage. So they ate, and if they weren't happy, they were busy enough and full enough to not quite notice. But then a wet season came and spoiled the greens, and rot set into the potatoes. When one hen gave up laying, their father killed it for its meat. Claire cried all day, and she was different after that. The children grew to hate their stepmother because she snapped at them every day, and each night their portion of supper grew smaller and smaller. Give them some more, their father would encourage, and Claire always said there was none to give. The children didn't notice that their father never offered them his own plate, or that Claire's portion was as small as their own. It is easy not to notice things when the noticing will mean you realize yourself unloved. One day the little boy, Hansel, went out with his father to the river to look for fish. When they came back once again empty-handed, his sister Gretel was nowhere to be seen. Claire told him she was sure the silly girl would find her own way home, and she made him go to bed. Hansel lay awake in the dark worrying for his big sister, and so when Claire came to him at midnight she found him wide-eyed and staring. Go out, she told him, and follow the trail of breadcrumbs your sister has left for you. And if you come back, I'll chop you up and put you in the pot for supper, because I'm so hungry I could scream. Hansel could believe it of Claire, with her sharp eyes and her sharper tongue, and so he put on his coat and shoes and ran out into the moonlight. As he would never see Claire again, he would never know it was his father who had joked, night after night, when the children were asleep, that he should like to eat them up, until Claire believed it might not be a joke at all, or that she had given Gretel the bread to leave a trail of crumbs for her brother to find. It wasn't enough kindness, you might say. Claire ought to have taken the children herself away from the house. Fear can blunt kindness, is all I can say to that. Hansel followed the trail of breadcrumbs in the moonlight for a long time, until clouds scudded over the moon and he got tired and lost the way. Or perhaps he just ate the breadcrumbs, because he was a little boy and he was hungry, and it is so easy to get lost when you are alone. He walked for a long time crying for his sister, and at last fell down into a sleep in the cold and dark. When he woke up he found a marvellous sight, a house made of gingerbread frosted with icing and dressed with comfits. How could there be such a thing in the world when he was so hungry? He crept up to the sugar-pane window and peeped inside, but the house seemed empty of people, though the shelves and tables inside all heaved with bread and cakes and biscuits. A joyful sort of anger seized him then, and he smashed a fist through the wall and ate until he felt sick, then kicked and kicked at the house until the front wall shattered, and hit the front door with a stick until the icing flaked off in great sheets and shattered to the ground. He was screaming when the witch found him, and she screamed too, at the mess he had made of her house and at the wildness in his eyes. She put him in a cake in the kitchen and went back to baking. She baked and baked and baked every day, sucking the wood's dry magic to fuel her oven and fill her stores. In the meantime, Gretel had already found the house. Her own anger was a more controlled thing than her brother's, something small and sour she could suck on like a comfort, and she was more cautious besides. So she had merely nibbled on the roof and crept into the cellar, damp with syrup sponges, until she knew what she faced. Gretel heard her brother roaring and the clink of the cage. She crept up the stairs of the cellar and peeked through the marchpane door, and seizing her courage rushed out and pushed the witch into her oven and shut it tight. But the oven wasn't lit yet, and the witch banged and banged on the sugar window, begging to be let out. "Why do you have so much food?" asked Gretel, rather than upbraiding her for locking up her brother. That part didn't seem so strange to her, having grown up the way she had. Why do you keep it all in the house? I'm just hungry, said the witch. I have always been so hungry. And although she must have been 100 years old, for a moment her face through the glass looked so much like Gretel's that the little girl felt sick and faint. Don't let her out, said Hansel through the bars of his cage. He had already managed to chew himself halfway through. But Gretel was a little older and a little wiser than her brother, and knew if she left the witch in the oven, she would one day have to take her place. So instead, Gretel opened the door and helped the old woman out. I should like to say they all lived happily ever after, but life is more difficult than that. But Hansel helped the witch mend her broken wall and door, and the witch started letting them take bread and cakes out of the house. First 1 loaf, then 2, then a dozen or more, and take them into the city to sell. What Hansel and Gretel did after that I cannot tell you, because they passed out of the woods and so out of my sight. But I think they had more good days than bad, and there is at least some sweetness in that.